Torna revealed a lot of new and interesting things about the world of Allrest and the lore of Xenoblade Chronicles 2. I've already been over quite a bunch of it, but this time we're going to talk about something that I haven't really mentioned before, that's actually only on screen for a few seconds, but still might be able to reveal quite a bit about not only the Allrest of 500 years ago, but just about Allrest in general. So with that out of the way, main story spoilers up to Chapter 7, and Torna spoilers up through the ending are all fair game for this video, so, as always, don't watch if you don't want to know about that stuff. And without further ado, let's start talking about Hugo's map. In a cutscene soon after he joins, Hugo and Adam converse in the control room of an Ardanian Titan ship, just talking about the world at large, things that have been going on, both catching up and lamenting the state the world is in during Malos's rampage. And during this cutscene, we could see that the table they're talking at has some sort of map on it, and there's one shot where you can actually see it head on, and get used to this image because this is probably going to be most of the rest of this video, because this turns out to be a general type of map of Allrest. Now, it's got some of whatever the Allrest script is on it, and yeah, I don't think anyone's been able to translate that into any existing language, so we're not going to talk about that, but the important thing is that you can see a lot of Titans on it, and there are quite a few interesting things to point out. So, as you might notice, a lot of these Titans are ones that we already know about, ones that exist, ones that you visit in this game or in the main story, but there are actually quite a few that are either hard to pin down, or just haven't been seen ever before or ever since. So we're gonna just talk about this stuff, starting out with the Titans that are obviously ones that we already have known about in the past. We could start out with the easiest two, because the two Titans explorable in the Golden Country, those being Gormott and the Kingdom of Torna, are both present on the map, and I believe their artwork, or artwork of the Titans in similar posing, is actually used elsewhere in Torna the Golden Country, so it's either a reuse of assets, implying that the menus are somewhat diegetic and are based on some sort of map or equipment the characters have, or it's just reusing assets to reuse assets. But regardless, you can easily see Gormott over here to the left of the world tree, and then Torna somewhat near to the lower right-hand corner. There's nothing really interesting to say about these two because, well, we've been to them in the game, and anything you'd want to know about them at the time of the Golden Country is known just by, well, playing the Golden Country. Next off, above the world tree, you can see Indal, which is captioned in the upper left-hand corner. Again, not really much there to talk about because there are a few cutscenes you see on Indal, and most of the interesting stuff is related to Amalthus, who ends up coming to Torna later on, so there's nothing too interesting there. Based on establishing shots, it does seem like the Indal of 500 years ago is roughly the same as the one you see in the main story, so nothing too interesting about that one. But then, over on the right, also captioned, but in a somewhat different way than most of the other Titans that have a caption, you could see More Ardain. Now, obviously it makes sense for More Ardain to be on a map, because Hugo owns this, it's on an Ardanian ship. It was probably Ardanian made with Ardanian interests in mind, and you might be somewhat confused as to More Ardain not being in the center of the map. Like, a lot of older maps made in a specific country would put that country or that capital in the center of it, just to, like, say, oh, my place is the most important place, and also because it's, like, the place the map maker would know the most about. But in Allrest, remember, Titans move in circles orbiting the world tree, so you can't really have a completely accurate map in terms of where something is located. And also, the world of Allrest in general has the world tree as a definitive center point for everything else to orbit around. So it kind of makes sense for that to be in the center, because this is actually the epicenter of kind of the entire civilization. It's basically the reason maps of the solar system have the sun in the center and don't have the Earth on the center, because, well, have you seen the geocentric model? It's a lot harder to model the motions if you think of the Earth as the center of everything, but if you think of the sun as the center, it's easier. I'm tangenting off into astronomy again. So let's talk about probably the most interesting of the 6 titans that we already know about. If you move your gaze towards the lower left-hand corner of the map, you could see another captioned titan which appears to be Temperantia. Now, the angle it's drawn on the map and the angle in its picture in the map screen in the main game are very different, but this is the only manta ray-shaped titan here, and I guess Temperantia was important enough 500 years ago to still be labeled as a big thing despite Judicium not existing. Again, there's not really too much that can be said about here, other than the fact that a cutscene in Indal in Torna confirms that Judicium had already fallen 500 years prior to the events of the main game, and it wasn't completely a wasteland at this time because it was in the process of getting battered by siren attacks or gargoyle attacks. It was a battlefield during the Aegis War, but the Kingdom of Judicium itself was not present at the time. And now, most interestingly, if you move a little bit above and to the right of Torna, you can see another labeled titan that's one of the squat-ish, flattened things with the flippers, and no, this is not Oriah. It is confirmed that the Kingdom of Oriah exists, and there is a side quest where you have to send some NPCs to a location you can actually visit in the main game, so they were clearly living on the same titan they are 500 years later. But this titan is not the Orion titan. This titan is actually Genbu, the Tantalese titan, except of course the Kingdom of Tantal had not been founded yet. Now, it is heavily implied that Genbu was known about and possibly even had a small population on it before the refugees from Torna went there and settled, but the fact that Genbu is actually here listed as a significant titan alongside, well, Torna, Morardain, and Indal, a lot of whom are world powers, is very, very interesting, especially because Oriah isn't there. Now, politically, it doesn't seem like Oriah is nearly as much of a superpower as it is later on in the main game, but at the same time, it does exist, and it does seem to have somewhat of a strong presence, so Genbu being there when it's a largely uninhabited titan is very, very interesting, unless Morardain was maybe considering expanding out to it, because remember, Torna takes place in the early days of Morardain, when it might be kind of really gung-ho about its expansionistness, which is not really a thing that it had again later on. The only reason it annexed Gormott was in kind of a misguided attempt to save the people of Morardain from the environment. So Genbu being there is a big oddity, but I guess it makes sense since it's a very large titan. Before we move on to the titans that obviously aren't ones we already know about, I'd like to draw your attention to the little titan ships that are moving around the map. Now obviously, titan ships used for transport are nowhere near this big relative to the size of a full titan, and it kind of seems like the scaling in general is wonky, because Indal is a lot smaller relative to Morardain, Gormott, Torna, and Genbu than it appears on this map, so obviously take the scaling of things with a grain of salt, but there are just a bunch of titan ships flying around to represent the fact that there are people and traders just going around to different titans to do different things. In general, all of the titans have a ship pointed at them, so I don't think they imply trade routes or anything like that, but it is worth noting that right here, in between Torna and Genbu, you could see something that looks to be a much bigger titan ship than the rest of them with a slightly different shape. Now, I am of the impression that this is actually Goldmith of the Argentum Trade Guild. In the very same cutscene in which you get to see this map, Adam does mention, or it might be Hugo, I don't know, that Argentum does exist. He references Argentum, it seems to just kind of be its regular thing already, and it already existed 500 years ago. There is a Napon in Torna who's a member of a different trade guild, but it looks like, well, we don't know what the other trade guild headquarters are like, but just based on this blob and comparing it to the shape of the other titan ships, which are just obviously supposed to represent the generic one balloon titan carrying a gondola thing underneath it, it does look like that is supposed to be Argentum, so hey, that's pretty cool. I guess there is another titan that is previously known about. Additionally, I'd like to talk about the fact that there are a bunch of things that sort of look like depictions of sea serpents in ye olde ocean maps. I'm not going to count any of these as titans. It just seems to be some sort of dramatization of big enemies like Lexoses that live in the Cloud Sea. There's a really big one in between Gormott and Temperantia that might supposed to be a squood. Kind of interesting. It might be Cloud Sea King Ken, which would make a lot of sense because in the main game, Cloud Sea King Ken lives inside Tantal, which is decidedly not part of the Cloud Sea. It's completely separated from it, so a giant squood named Cloud Sea King having lived in the Cloud Sea at some point makes a lot of sense to me, so that's what I'm going to headcanon that as. But beyond that, we could see 3 figures that are obviously titans and are obviously ones we've never seen before. So I'm going to go out on something that's actually not too big of a limb now that I think about it, and say that these are actually the 3 titans that are name-dropped in Torna the Golden Country, but are not ones we get to visit in either that or the main game. And you might be thinking, what are these 3 titans? I thought there were only 2. Well, you needed to pay pretty close attention to a few lines of dialogue in order to get the 3rd one. So we're gonna start with probably the easiest one, I guess, I'm not really sure, and that being the thing directly below the World Tree, which looks somewhat similar to a turtley-like titan. You could argue it's a fish-type monster, but I think it's supposed to be a titan, I'm not 100% sure. But just in general, based on its shape and the fact that it's relatively similar in size and figure to Genbu, I'm going to say that this is the titan of Sia. Now remember, it's worth noting that Torna the Golden Country takes place not too long after the sinking of Sia by Malos, so any maps are probably not going to be that up to date since they seem to be hand-drawn, so Sia would still be on a map despite having been sunk. We can see the Sian Titan in the opening cutscene of Torna. It doesn't look exactly like that figure, but Moradane seemed to be at odds with Sia for a long time, so they might not want to depict them correctly or something out of spite. I don't really know about that, but I feel like that's the closest match to that Titan. There's a thing that looks like a giant fin on the back of it, which is 100% accurate, but that might represent where Amarantha is, because you could see that in the cutscene. I'm not really sure about that, but I'm pretty sure that one is supposed to be Sia. Moving on to the west, if you go a little bit out past Gormott, you'll see what appears to be a smaller 4-limbed Titan. Depicted smaller, might not actually be smaller in canon, but it appears to be, well, not the same as Gormott, a similar kind or a similar species like Araya to Genbu. It's not really drawn detailed enough for you to tell whether or not it is exactly the same, like a just different goat thing, but it does appear to be at least somewhat similar in stature or build. I'm going to go out on a bit of a limb and say that this Titan is Specia. This is a Titan that's referenced in a couple cutscenes, and it is where a part of the final cutscene takes place. Now, the reason I'm saying this is Specia is for quite a few reasons, actually. The first one is that Specia looks so much like Gormott, a lot of people were actually confused as to where certain events near the end of the game were taking place. To clarify, the fight with Gort the second time takes place in Gormott, and then after that, Team Laura leaves for Specia, and their segment of the ending cutscene where they find the refugee camp and then get attacked by Indal takes place there. It's just worth noting that these two environments are very similar looking to each other to the point where people got confused. If you're wondering where I'm going with this other 4-limbed Titan is depicted as being close to Gormott physically. And just kind of based on the way environments work, locations that are closer to each other are more likely to have similar environments than ones that are further apart. Additionally, while yeah, Genbu and Araya are very different and we don't see enough of the environments of Sia to really tell if Titans of the same species are supposed to look like each other, I'd just say that yeah, if Gormott and Specia are the same kind of Titan, it makes more sense for them to look like each other, so I'm just going to go with that. And finally, we move on to what's probably the most interesting one of these 3 unidentified Titans in terms of design. That being the somewhat avian, somewhat draconian, somewhat like the Tornan Titan inspired by Telethia thing to the east of the World Tree and to the north of Torna. Now, the reason I'm saying this one is more interesting than the other two that are also basically smaller versions of other Titans, Sia being Araya/Genbu and Specia being Gormott, is because none of those Titans are supposed to be anything special. While the Tornan Titan is supposed to be a force to be reckoned with, the most powerful Titan ever, and capable of destroying other nation-sized Titans if it really lets things loose. So the fact that there appears to be another Titan of the same kind just lurking around Allrest is very, very interesting. But we have to give this thing a name, and I think I have one. That being Estem. Now, what's Estem? Well, it's another nation Titan that is barely referenced at all, and when it is, only in Torna the Golden Country. When you first meet Mikhail, he mentions that he was sold to the village in Torna where he was found from Estem, from his home. Seemingly, Estem is a nation where he was born. It could be a village or a region in Torna, but later on, if you talk to the monster grandma over in Aletta, the one you need to talk to after beating all the unique monsters in the game to get her to join your community, and the one who just kind of keeps track of the amount you've killed, she mentions she's been all around the world keeping track of unique monsters. Now, she mentions a few places: Gormott, Torna, Morardain, then Sia and Specia, and also Estem. So Estem must be another nation-sized Titan somewhere in the vicinity of the rest of them, and being in these concentric rings means it's closer to the World Tree than some of them, so that does actually make a lot of sense. I don't know if Estem being shaped like Torna means anything in terms of them wanting to do a slave trade more with Torna or something. I don't really think that has any bearing on it, but I guess something happened to Estem in between Torna the Golden Country and the main game, and it just ceased to be a big deal. Either that, or the story of the main game just never took you there. Other than that, beyond Araya, the only egregious omission is the Leftherian Archipelago, but I guess since Torna has the Royal Spirit Crucible there, and maybe Morardain didn't care about it, I don't know. There's a thing that sort of looks like a dotted island chain, but it's just a bunch of Titan ships in a row, so yeah, Leftheria not being there doesn't make too much sense. Beyond that, I guess all the other major Titans are really accounted for, so yeah, that's all the secrets and hidden details, don't know why in Game Explain Now, that I could find in Hugo's Map of the World. So, thank you so much for watching. As always, if you've made it this far, like, comment if you haven't, subscribe. I'm getting pretty close to 8,000, and I want to get to 10,000 at some point, so everything helps. And stay tuned for more videos, including the story finale of Monado Monday is coming very soon. And as always, until next time, this is Luxin, signing off.